Thank you all for being here and for taking part in the third of four installments of the Artificial Intelligence webinar series, which is an extension of the Great Admissions Redesign Project brought to you by the Lumina Foundation, the Council of Post-Secondary Education, and the Kentucky Student Success Collaborative. We are not only speaking to our stakeholders across the state of Kentucky, but we're also speaking to the grantee awardees across the United States who are also conducting Great Admissions Redesign projects in their respective states. So welcome to you all as well. My name is Errol Wint. I am representing Marbury's Consulting Solutions, and I am facilitating critical part of the Great Admissions Redesign project for the state of Kentucky. And I'm very excited to be able to partner with my colleague, Artist Kaiju, who is from Element 454, and he will be taking us through the third installment today, which is going to be focused on AI ethics. To give everybody a quick overview of what we've covered, just very briefly, we've had a chance to get a really strong foundation with Artist, who is an expert in this field, as you can see here, an AI educator, a nationally renowned speaker in the area of artificial intelligence. He's an EdTech CEO, and then also the host of the Generation AI podcast. We started off with the first session in terms of laying a foundation of what AI is for all of our audience who are charged with leading a reimagination on how enrollment is going to be approached with the challenges ahead, recognizing that the context of artificial intelligence is inevitable and is essential for us to be considering what is going to create a strong differentiating value proposition. And then we went into the AI skills where artists have the chance to walk everybody through some really tangible examples of what it means to move forward and actually leverage the tools that are out there in an effective way. In our survey from last time, we got some good feedback in terms of the anatomy of a prompt being very helpful, as well as the walkthroughs of the different creations of images and videos and the uses across different industries. And we're contextualizing all of this within the enrollment management, field, because we know that the audience are enrollment planning experts. We recognize, and this is where I coming in with 15 plus years of experience in enrollment management, that you all are tasked with a mighty challenge to be able to go to your respective campuses and really champion the need to think about the future of admissions, the future of enrollment planning in a way that contextualizes the rapidly changing landscape. And today we're going to move forward in a conversation around AI ethics and privacy that will be led by artists, and I will be asking artists questions throughout. I want to prompt the audience as we go through this and encourage you all to put any questions that you may have in the chat. This is your opportunity to really be open and honest about some of the not only opportunities or areas of interest, but also some of the pain points as you look ahead in your day-to-day responsibilities and you think about what are some of the ethical dilemmas that you are wrestling with when it comes to accepting artificial intelligence as a norm within your day-to-day responsibilities, and how can you take these ethical considerations and present them in your respective spaces so that you're able to do your jobs the best way that we can. So without further ado, I'm happy to re-welcome back my colleague, Artist, to the conversation to lead us in this discussion. Artist, take it away.
Thanks, Errol. This is hey everybody. As Errol said, we are going through this conversation and having multiple parts and breaking down AI and AI literacy. For a lot of us in marketing, higher education, enrollment management. So today, we're going to be talking about AI ethics, but I want to contextualize this a little bit. If you haven't attended any of our prior webinars, one of the things that we want to make sure that comes across is that the age of AI has begun, and AI, artificial intelligence, is as revolutionary as mobile phones and the internet. So there is a big wave that's coming, and it's going to transform a lot of how it's going to change on how people work, learn, travel. They get healthcare, communicate, they get educated, and again, this is not something that it's something in the future. We're seeing a lot of these changes happening day to day. And part of that is how do we get our leaders and how do we get ourselves um, situated and understand AI and how we can kind of change us so we are at the forefront of it and we're taking full advantage for our institutions, for ourselves, and learning more about it. But as we do that, one of the things that comes up over and over again is that there's people on one side and there's people on the other side. And when we talk about ethics, is that the fundamental premise of the AI ethics, we can think that technology is never neutral. And as a technologist, I can see the benefits of using it. Excuse me, using a technology, and you can use the technology for good, or you can use the technology. You can certainly use it for bad as well. So when you start thinking about kind of that means that things like large language models or generative AI can have various impact based on how they're being used and understood, right? So it's not inherently good or bad, but instead its effects can be shaped by the intentions and the decisions that of the people who develop it, who apply it, who use it every single day. So, for example, AI can improve college admissions by providing more personalized support for applicants, but it can also unintentionally introduce biases in some cases if not managed carefully, right? And therefore, we really need to understand and need to get really good about understanding, where that technology is coming from and how it's being used, so we can identify and use it to to ensure that the benefits everyone equally and fairly and responsibly, right? So that the whole idea of using technology responsibly comes up over and over again. And that's exactly what we're going to do today, right? So today we're going to go through and have a conversation, but also bring up some misconceptions, give you definitions, and kind of touch base on a lot of the different areas and questions that have come up from over the past year and a half of me teaching and speaking and kind of all the audience's questions that come up around AI, generative AI. So we're going to try to answer a lot of those things today while giving you the fundamentals and the background as well. So at the end of the day, when we think about like just the definitions, and we're going to kind of focus on definitions, and we're going to kind of explore that a little bit more as we go through. But at the core of it, AI ethics, it's essentially the moral principles that guide the responsible use of AI to ensure that it's, again, fair, transparent, and accountable. So there is accountability in there, there's fairness, and we're using it for things that benefiting our constituents as well. So at the very core, that's kind of the definition of AI ethics. It's really just the principles that we apply on it for different use cases. There is no global AI is really good for or really bad. It's just that we're applying it for different use cases. And in our cases, we are applying it for enrollment management and how we think about it in enrollment management as well.
Artist, I want to chime in on your definition and just say a quick comment as I think about my time working in enrollment management. I remember as especially as things got more and more competitive and we really left that enrollment management phase that Don Hostler ushered in and entered into a much more competitive realm, especially during the 2010s. And a book came out called Weapons of Math Destruction by Kathy O'Neill. And there was this huge conversation around the ethics of using data, whether that
Yeah.
was affinity scoring, in
Yep.
terms of trying to make decisions around who you focus your attention on or who you put limited resources around and what that meant from a bias standpoint. Do you see this as the next vanguard of ethical considerations in terms of this AI piece, given that we're coming out of the data, the data considerations and how that can do harm, and now you have this, and what are your thoughts around that kind of comparison and evolution, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, generative AI and kind of what we again when we talk about AI, there is predictive AI that we talked about during our first webinar, and then there's generative AI. When we think about predictive AI, is around like what kind of data we're building models, and we'll talk about some of that today around fairness and bias in the data and then how we manage that. Where with generative AI, we have to worry more about misinformation or using the tool in a way that is not really intended to be used. To use it as, for example, taking everything for that's true that comes out of the tool for factual information, and we'll go over some of that stuff. So as we use some of these generative AI tools for text, it's like it's a generation, it's generating stuff, but you don't always know if that's true or not. So it has the ethical considerations of misinformation, and that is perhaps the biggest one that we can see. But also, if you go into other use cases, for example, when you use generative AI for images or when you use it for video, now you can create or audio, you can create deep fakes and you can create representations of people that maybe they didn't want to be represented that way, or images that can be misguiding the viewer. So how we think about those use cases is really, really important, but it's not necessarily at the mass level that we're talking on predictive AI, where we're making decisions on these engines. This is about creating content that can be misinformation or representing something that is not really true.
Right, right. Thank you for that response.
Mm-hmm. And you know, as we go through this, it's the first question that I always get is, where does ChatGPT get its information? Where does it get its information? And one of the discussions that we have we had during our second around AI skills, we talked a little bit about how AI models or generative AI models and large language models, how they are taking all of the world's information, and they are making representations of that. So they're not reading it word by word. They're not storing that information. Think about it as a fuzzy representation of all that information that is being, that they're being trained on. And when you ask it a question, it can kind of make reasoning. It can put a lot of things together very, very easily, but it's not going somewhere and saying, "Oh, I'm going to retrieve this piece of information." So the information that it's producing, yes, it's about, the world knowledge and how they can come about, but it is the data and the training is around all of the internet, a lot of the public information, the public data that's available out there. So think about everything that these companies like OpenAI or Google can get their hands on. They're throwing it in and they're training. And one of the things that even come up with that is there is a interesting kind of dilemma right now where some of the materials might be a little somewhat copyrighted, but in some cases not. So those are for the courts to decide later on. But when we think about it, our own use cases, ChatGPT doesn't really have like it's trained on all the data from the internet that's publicly available, but you're not supposed to use it as a information engine. You're supposed to use it as a reasoning engine. So don't rely on it for factual information, and we'll touch base on that just a little bit. So when we think about kind of, again, we're trying to go a little bit further along, and when we think about these systems around bias, right? So bias in AI systems, or AI bias, is really this systematic error that comes up. And if you think about it a little bit further, it just refers to the systematic and repeatable errors in these machine learning models. They create unfair outcomes, in this case, such as privileging one arbitrary group of users over another, right? So it can occur due to like a lot of different factors, but it's the bias in the training data, the bias in the algorithm itself, or even the bias in the way that results are being interpreted afterwards, right? So bias can be introduced in a lot of different ways as part of the as part of the outcome. And that's where we are really, really good at figuring out, especially in enrollment management, how do we think about the bias that's happening in specifically in enrollment management. Now, I have a whole kind of podcast for those of you who are, I have a podcast called Generation AI Show where we talk a lot about AI in higher education. And if you want to go a little bit deeper into this, in episode 8, we talk very deeply on how do we rethink grades and biasing in admissions, right? How do we think when we're letting somebody in, humans have a lot of bias inherently, and humans have a lot of bias around not just because of our upbringing and our background, but you reading an application and somebody else reading an application, you might have different outcomes for that student. Depending on when that student, when you read that application, if you read it before lunch or if you read it after lunch, that could be a different outcome on that, because we have a lot of biases that come along and we make a lot of mistakes. So that's why in some very selective institutions, there is a double read, for example, or even sometimes a triple read, but there really adds a lot of complexity to the process and adds more and more people. So our idea is like, well, look, if we have our rubrics correctly, AI can do that really a lot better. It doesn't reduce that bias to zero, but we can build systems that can be incorporate less and less bias as part of those systems. So that's kind of, what one of the things that they should probably take a look at is how we start thinking about this bias in admissions around the admissibility component, but then also around the additional components like writing. Writing is something that not everybody does very well, and there's a lot of bias that get introduced when an essay comes along, right? And if that person is not a native English speaker, they might not have written a good essay, so they get penalized because they're not a good writer necessarily, or that their English is not a first language. So that's another one where we, for example, see AI detectors basically penalizing and saying that papers for students are plagiarized or they are written by AI because they might not be first, they might not be first or English speakers, and that comes through, and that's a bias within the algorithms or those detection algorithms. So that's why today our biggest recommendation around kind of AI detection for writing is it's just not possible to do that. So it's you basically a snake oil, so to speak. You can't really detect if because the AI is really good, and you can't detect that from somebody who writes really well. So we can go talk all day long about AI bias and kind of what bias is. But one of the things that comes out, and the thing that is really important around biasing, is this idea of data balancing, right? So when you train a system, you're kind of training it and you're starting to think about all the data that you're feeding into it. Well, think about all of the internet data. There's a lot of English-based information and English data. Well, so that means that these models understand English very well, but they might not understand an obscure language very well. So when you translate something, it's not going to be really good at translating into that particular language really well. So that's one way that we can think about it, but also we can, as part, like, essentially data balancing in this AI systems, both predictive and generative, refers to this process of equalizing the proportion of different classes or categories within the data set. So if I have, and again, this is important because in machine learning on these models, it might perform poorly on an imbalanced data set where one class is significantly outnumbers the other. In predictive AI, balanced data can really lead to more accurate predictions. And whereas in generative AI, it can result in a model that generates a more diverse and representative range of outputs. So if we think about this, then in kind of our use cases in enrollment forecasting, if you build a model with your historical data for your institution, and there was, let's say that you only get your students or 95% of your students or from one particular state or your current or Kentucky or the current state, but then now you're going into and opening up a new market somewhere. Well, you can't predict how good that new market is going to do from your historical data because you don't have representation for that new data set. So basically, when a new student comes in from that new location, it's going to say, well, this student is not going to enroll because he hasn't really seen any student from that location enroll in the past, right? So that's a bias because it did not have enough data. Now you can start thinking about it differently. And it's like, well, how about if we use ethnicity or race, or how about, which we can't really use, but how about we use a very different again, I keep going to location because that's really important. But think about it, right? If you don't have representation in your original data set, we have bias that can result in kind of our predictions. And again, these predictions can be both for enrollment, it can be for how much financial aid to allocate to different students or different groups, and those are really, really important. We should start thinking about in some cases, as we evaluate a lot of different data sources for admissibility as well, we give them scores where it's like, well, how are we basing those scores on? Like, what is the historical data that we're putting in there? So this ability to in bias in data is really, really important. And it also comes through when we start, like a lot of the work that we did in the past has been around, well, your prospect pool is a lot bigger than your applicant pool, and your admitted pool is a lot or your applicant pool is a lot bigger than your admitted pool, and your enrolled is smaller than your admitted. So like when you think about that, it's like you have less and less data going through. So how do you make sure that you have the right representation so you're not under reporting, right? Because now you're going to say, well, I can only have, let's say, 1,000 or 2,000 students who have been admitted, but I have 50,000 or 100,000 prospects, and I have 20,000 applications. So it's like the representation there becomes really, really small. And even within that person who enrolled, you might have even smaller groups in there. So it becomes really difficult to start balancing that data through. So this is in predictive area. Now here's an interesting one, right? So Google trained their generative AI model, and or even this is even others. And if you remember a year ago when DALL-E and a few of these generative AI image generation tools came about, one of the things that was important was like well, basically, it was generating when you ask it to generate, hey, generate a doctor or give me an image on a doctor. Well, guess what? It was generating most likely it was generating a white male doctor, right? Dressed in, dressed in kind of a doctor's coat. Well, that's not representative of all the doctors. So, but the reason for that is because the model saw a lot of that data. The training data had a lot of doctors that were male, white, or Caucasian. So it saw a lot of that data. So it's biasing towards the majority of what the data that it saw. So now when you go back and you say, okay, how do we avoid that? There's a number of different techniques, But the one that Google decided to do is essentially when you're asking for, in this case, it's saying generate an image of a 1943 German soldier. Well, I mean, you and I know what that looks like, but perhaps they didn't have a lot of German soldiers. But they're overcorrected, and essentially what they did is anytime that you ask the model to generate a person or somebody, make sure that you add some diversity in there. So this prompt gets translated into generate 1943 German soldier, make sure they're diverse from different races or whatever. So whoever tried to fix the outcome of that post the training basically messed up and they overcorrected. So now everything, like every historical figure, became racially diverse, right? So we have, in this case, we have a 1943 German soldier, that images that were generated, and you have, very different, diverse representations, which is not accurate, historically not accurate. So that's when I'm talking about AI and AI ethics. It's not necessarily that the model was just bad. It just had some bias in it, and Google decided to fix it by changing it and saying, oh, we make it more diverse, right? And it's like, well, that's not really the appropriate. So when we use these models for things that are important to us, like, for example, if we embed this, or if we put this model um, uh, for generating images for history classes, or for if our kids are using it, if my kids are using it, then they're going to get very, very weird results. So it's skewing things tremendously, and that is not factual. That is misinformation, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. So Google took it offline because there was a backlash, and now they're training their models, and they're still training it. Over a month and a half later, they're retraining it to basically embed that data balancing for a lot of these prompts that are coming out as part of it. So that's a really, really good one. And of course, we did a podcast on it, an episode, kind of the culture. And if you go in and listen to it, you get a little bit more into like what was the issue, like how these things get produced, like what's the outcome, and exactly what do they do in here to kind of have that available. So, I mean, we talked a lot about kind of moving through, but now another question that comes up, is it factual? Is the information factual? And the short answer is the information that is generated is actually kind of put together, right? So facts are, like, one of the things that I tell folks is that do not use ChatGPT for factual information unless you have kind of provided it with the context and the facts before as part of your prompts, and or if there's other systems, and we'll talk about how that's mitigated. But this is one of the questions that I get a lot. Is it factual? And the answer is, if you're just using ChatGPT, maybe not. Because it's not about facts. It's not Google. It's not going someplace and retrieving that information. It's actually creating it. It's generating it, right? It might seem very, very believable, but it might not be true. So this idea that that models or this AI tools can be factual. There is a lot of techniques, and we'll just show you that in just a second. But this idea can be, again, something that you should start thinking about as not an information repository, but more of a reasoning engine, and kind of a tool that you can kind of generate stuff and help you with writing and so on and so forth. So that's the way that we use ChatGPT today. And when it makes stuff up, that idea that it's making things up is called hallucinations, right? So this term hallucinations, you're probably again, all of these definitions are things that If you understand them, then you can kind of talk to a vendor, you could talk to somebody else and say, well, how do you handle hallucinations? How do you handle biasing? And how do you, so how do you handle all those different things? And understanding it becomes really, really important for you to understand them first in order for you to ask for those. So when you think about hallucinations, kind of in generative AI, hallucinations refers to instances when the AI generates information that is not present or grounded in the input data, right? So when you had all of the training data, that's not really there. It just put different pieces together and it said, oh, this is true, right? Think about like when you're making up a story for a kid, it's like you're kind of bringing different elements together and you're bringing a story, but you're hallucinating it. So the AI is imagining data or details, hence the term hallucination. So this is actually a term that gets used quite a bit in the generative AI circles around hallucinations and large language models. All right. So we think about hallucinations, but it's like,
Artist, I'm sorry for interrupting you. Can I chime in?
yeah, of course.
I appreciate this review. And I'm putting my enrollment management hat on. I've heard you talk about, how the Chat GPT engine is a reasoning engine but not actually factual. And you've just hit that piece as well. You talked on bias and, and really kind of thinking about what the implications of creating systems to mitigate that bias, the data set, creating a balanced data set on the predictive modeling side, as well as Gen AI. And then now we're going down the road of hallucinations for an industry like enrollment management, right?
Mm-hmm.
That banks its product on authenticity, looking a parent in the eye, right?
Mm-hmm.
And saying our product, our university experience is going to be exactly what we're advertising it as. And then contextualizing it even further, where this FAFSA issue that the enrollment management community is facing has really kind of rocked some of that confidence. How
Mm-hmm.
do we take all of this, this information around some of these ethical considerations and make a case to say, you know what, this is the time for enrollment management operations to integrate this in as they're continuing to find what it means for something that isn't based in fact, but rather reasoning to be an effective tool. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, I mean that's exactly. It makes a lot of sense, and that's why we're trying to provide this AI literacy to say, okay, this is the output, and this is kind of how it's built, and this is how it works. So now that you know what the limitations are, and where it's good at and where it's not good at, then you can start making decisions on the use cases. So you're not going to go to ChatGPT and ask it about your internal data or ask it about the history of your school because it might not know that, or maybe ask it for an obscure alumni. But you can go to ChatGPT and ask them about concepts. It's really good at producing those concepts, and it's really good about that. So when you mention how can we trust it, or how can we think about where authenticity is kind of the key, it's about using the tool for the use cases that it's really, really good at, and providing it your grounding with your own data, right? So that's where we're going to go into the next phase is like, okay, this idea of grounding. We have this very powerful engine and reasoning engine that are these large language models and ChatGPT, but it needs additional information from us in order to personalize that output to us. It needs to personalize it based on our data and our facts. If we're asking for our institution, it needs to personalize it based on our voice and our authenticity. So grounding is really, it refers to the mechanism by which a system really retrieves relevant information from a knowledge source, and it's using it to generate a response. So if we think about this large language models or even ChatGPT as the source of information, as the reasoning engine, and then we provide it and say, give me some answers or rewrite this particular content or give me an answer based on this piece of text that I'm giving you, it's really good at giving you that answer. So that's grounding, right? So that's what we're talking about grounding. And last time when we did our prompt engineering, we talked about like some of the features that ChatGPT has around, for example, the idea of how does it, like custom instructions, right? So when we go to custom instructions, it gives you like, I have to tell it that, hey, my name is Artis Kadu. I'm the founder, blah, 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 of Element 451. Here's some of the things you need to know about me. Here's how I want my responses, right? So now when it's generating content, it's taking that grounding into context as well. If we're creating different versions of this, we're upload or ChatGPT, we're able to upload documents and say, use these documents as the factual information for us creating an email, for example, or creating something that's more relevant. So that's the use cases here, and that's kind of the grounding component. And when we think about grounding, then it's yes, ChatGPT is a product at the end of the day, but we're talking about these large language models in the background. Our product as well, like at Element 451 or even other products, the way this works or this grounding works is that if you're using a chatbot and you're saying, well, how does it know that the information about our school? Well, the reason it knows is because we're grounding it. Like we're asking it questions. Let's say, hello, when do classes start? Well, if I ask this question in ChatGPT, it's going to make up something, right? As a matter of fact, let's do that. It's like, when do classes start? But it has no context of anything. It's like, are you asking a specific institution or program? If which, let me know. So I can ask about.
Can you put a Murray State University? I'm out of curiosity. Let's see if anything comes up for that. Well, you've got University of Louisville. That's good. That's good there.
Yeah. So what you see over here, what ChatGPT did is actually it went out and it pulled that information, or it searched the knowledge base, which is the internet, and it went to Louisville.edu to pull in that information. So inherently by itself, it doesn't have that information, right? So it can't give you, in some cases, it can make it up if it's not connected to the internet. But in this case, ChatGPT is smart enough to understand that I don't have that and I'm going to need to go get it somewhere else. So he pulled out that information, and then it's actually grounding it in real data from this source over here. And then it's giving you the information in here. It's the same thing for what we do when we use different chatbots or different products, is that when you ask that question, the AI or the smart bot is actually pulling and grounding its answers in conversation history. So things that you had before, the knowledge base. For example, if you loaded information in there in the ChatGPT, it uses the internet. It goes out, and that's a feature of ChatGPT. It's not every model, for example. Like if I use Claude, I can go in and I can say, when do Element University classes start? So let's see if it's actually going to, well, in this case, they've trained it, right? So they've trained it. You remember we talked a little bit about to say no and to, like, if we're asking for specific factual things. But earlier on, this was a big problem for a lot of these models, right? You will just make things up because they didn't have the grounding. In case it's not giving you that answer, it's saying go to the university site. So they've kind of trained them a little bit to modify them so facts are not coming through now, because people were asking a lot of facts in this in this chats, and they were not believing it, and they were coming up with misinformation and hallucinations. So these companies are actually tweaking it and making the products better by not returning misinformation, right? So that's really, really good. And that's what we want for sure. But if you think about other products and chatbots on your website and so on and so forth, we want to make sure that it's grounding in knowledge base, your institutional info. If it's logged in, it can actually pull in the person's profile, so it can personalize things better. And we call that the context. We call it a context window. So that's kind of the grounding component. So that is the main thing. If you don't take anything out of this webinar today, is that hallucinations are a big thing with large language models. You can't necessarily trust the information that comes out of ChatGPT or some of these models if they are not grounding, if they're not pulling the information from somewhere that is a source of truth. ChatGPT is connected to the internet, so it goes out and pulls that in some cases. But for example, if you use Claude or if you use another model that is not connected to the internet, it's going to not give you that information. So anyway, so think about it that way. In this case, this is BoltBot. This is the Element chatbot. We have all those knowledge bases sources together, and we can put a really nice email for you based on the personalized email, the dates that are coming back, and the institutional info here as well.
So, Artis, in respect to grounding, I want to ask you about governance structures and get your thoughts of what key governance structures globally, domestically, but also within the higher education university system that should be considered when integrating artificial intelligence that is grounded to ensure that it is, its fidelity towards authenticity remains high.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a couple of questions in there. One of them is, how do I make sure that if I'm embedding a chatbot, let's say, in my admission site, it's not answering questions about, I don't know, politics or something else like that, right? And that's part of why, like, we do a lot of work to kind of not just ground it into your content, but also do a lot of work to make sure that it's only answering questions on the data sets that we've given it, on all the information that we've given it. And what we've done in the past and what we do today is that we also can change that context. If it's in the admissions page, it's going to answer questions about admissions. If it's in the registrar page or financial aid page, that's going to answer questions about those, so you can understand the context. So what you're talking about is, first is like data. How much data? Like, what kind of data do you give it? And if it's an outward facing component, for example, like a chatbot that's on your website, you can give it that public facing information. But we also have AI assistants that are internally focused, meaning that they help you with writing emails, communicating with students, building campaigns. And in that case, you can also ask it questions for internal documents to the school. So that's what we're talking about. We have kind of different levels of data that they have access to. So you think about kind of acquiring a tool or working with this chatbots or working with this AI assistants, you need to think about like the data and how it's, what kind of data you put where, right? If it's internally, externally, if one department has access to it versus another. So that's a big thing for sure. Incorporating it into your CRM, for example, is one of the things that we would highly recommend. And if it knows some of the governance of the data of the underlying system, so this way you don't have to specifically tell it. And that's probably the best way to think about that.
I appreciate this answer, Artis, and I hope for our audience members who are data stewards out there recognizing the infrastructural implications of integrating AI go far beyond simply the use cases. But there are true infrastructural reimagination imperatives that have to come into play when these decisions are made. I see you have, is my data secure? Security is a big piece that's been big across all industries in relation to the emergence of artificial intelligence. Why don't you tell us what you're thinking about that, Artis?
Yeah, I mean, so we originally had this webinar just be AI ethics. And the questions that we get around security usually over trump some of the ethical questions on hallucinations and things like that. And that is one of the main components or one of the main reasons why a lot of institutions have not moved forward very quickly in adopting that AI is because there is a fear of data security by using ChatGPT or using some of these public models. And that is there's two answers to that, right? One of them is yes, some of that stuff was true maybe a year ago or when we started, because the ChatGPT or some of the other chatbots did not have the ability to give you separation and give you the reassurance that they were actually using that data because they were providing a free service. They were using that data to train their models again. Since then, they have kind of moved on and done a lot of work. And the next question is about that. But in terms of security, you're loading data into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT is pretty, I would say, secure in the sense that it's so I'm going into the enterprise OpenAI enterprise privacy component in here, so you can go in there and take a look at that yourself. But essentially, if you use the ChatGPT team, if you use the pro version, if you use the enterprise version or the APIs, our products are built on the API platform. You get a lot of security out of the box, things like SOC 2 compliance. With the APIs as well, you get data encryption. So you get a lot of those security, the same type of security that we get with other kind of cloud-based services, right? So your data is really, it's secure. And then we can start thinking about like some of the other components, like, well, is it like, will AI or will ChatGPT or will OpenAI use my data, right? So it's like, if I upload an internal memo or something like that, will it now keep that memory in there? And this was one of the biggest things that firms that were very security driven at first, they're like, no, 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 this is proprietary information. We do not want to upload it to OpenAI. We do not trust it. So we don't want to do that. But since then, there is a lot of different controls that are in place, both for smaller institutions and also larger organizations that can they can kind of make your data secure, but also not allowed to be trained on that particular data set. And when you go, I'm going to go here one more time. There's a couple of features that help out with that, and you can turn them on or off. But this idea of a temporary chat in ChatGPT. So if I go in here and I turn temporary chat, you will basically say that, hey, we want this won't appear in your history. We also are not going to create memories or use to train our models. For safety purposes, we may keep this copy just for 30 days and then throw it out. And that's kind of what they're telling in here. So there's no model training, no memory. It's the memory is off, and it's not being used for history at all. Now you can turn this privacy features on and off in ChatGPT as well. If you go to settings and then you can go to data controls, and in here now you can turn that off as well and say improve the model for everyone, meaning that it's just like Google, right? Or Facebook, when they say, just leave this, or even Apple, when you use the apps, it's like, yeah, sure, use my data or use my usage for improving your service. So it's the same thing here, right? But you can turn those off. So in this case, I can turn it off, and it's not going to be used for that going forward. So that's a really good way to think about it. And again, you can kind of take a look at the enterprise privacy. And of course, I just pulled up OpenAI right now, but you can go to Claude, you can go to Google, and you can see exactly the same things, right? This idea of the trust component and the trust portal and the security and how they're handling your data. So you have a lot of controls over that. So that's one way. Now, Like as we move forward, it's not just about generating text or generating kind of words. It's also generative AI is really good about generating images and videos and audio as well. So we started to talk a little bit about this idea of AI ethics think about when we think about generating images and generating video, like deep fakes or misrepresentations, for example, right? So these aren't real people. These are generated by AI, by Midjourney, which is an image model. And they look pretty real to me or to anybody. And again, this is maybe, I would say, from these were generated last September or August, so a little bit closer to a year old. Some of these images, but the AIs have gotten a lot better since then in kind of generating even better images. So in this case, what this is showing you is a misrepresentation of campus. So if you're putting this in your brochure, in your marketing brochure, and saying, "Hey, this is kind of how our campus looks like," that's probably not a good idea, right? So that's the ethical considerations on when we use this for marketing purposes and when we use them for but Element can certainly use these for marketing purposes because we don't have a physical campus. Like, we just want to represent the idea of Element being used as a CRM, let's say, or an engagement platform for a multi for prospects, to current students, to alumni, to multi-generational. So this photo then represents the idea, but it doesn't, like, there is no meaning beyond that, right? It's just a campus. It can be any campus anywhere. It doesn't really matter. But if you're using it for your own institutions to generate images, think about that. Now, if you're generating an image that is like a concept or an illustration or something like that for for a magazine that's being used as a background or whatever. So think about the context. Always think about the context of how you're using this generative AI, and is that important? Does it misrepresent something, right? Does the buildings misrepresent something in the background, or you just want a stock photo? Think about it just like a way you're using stock photos today, right? So if you're going to use a stock photo, why not just use generative AI? It's very, very similar to that. It's not that you're saying that this is our students in here, if you're using that stock photo, for example. So think about it in that way as you're using it, but there's other implications as well, right? So when we think about AI ethics, now take this and now I can put somebody's face, a real person's face, into a very different situation because these models can actually do that. They can generate. So that goes into, again, deep fakes and misrepresentations. And I do have we do have a kind of, again, kind of this trend of kind of going back to some of the thinking and these topics around deep fakes, kind of the art and science and ethics of how they work, and how how they can, how good they look, and what you can expect, and kind of the different use cases for what we call synthetic media, right? You're going to see a lot of this happening this year because it's an election year. So the idea of misrepresentation is really important. As a matter of fact, this is really even more important because now AI voices and voices on the other side are so good. So you might actually be talking to to an AI synthetic voice on the other side when the next time you call for a customer service somewhere, or when you're, I don't know, like if you've talked to a tree bot or something else like that on the other side, you might be talking again to a synthetic voice. But then fraud becomes really interesting when you start thinking about that as well. So the AI considerations in here for enrollment management, enrollment and enrollment marketing specifically are, how can we use these tools to amplify our work, to basically make sure that we can actually get content to our students, engage with our students better. And yes, there is this idea of essentially authenticity, but authenticity is not about like I need to have my face in everything. It means that it's about the context that we're in. Like if that student needs an answer 24/7 and the only thing they can do is call, you don't want them to go to a voicemail, right? You understand, it understands that it's actually a synthetic voice on the other side. So now you can actually have a real conversation. It's really, really interesting what's happening with this. And one of the things that I wanted to highlight is that OpenAI put together one of their latest models. They announced this past Tuesday. And I would highly recommend you go take a look at some of those use cases, because the use cases are really tremendous in this model on how it can work with voice and how we can work with different use cases of voice. It can kind of represent different situations. It can be a tutor. It can be a pal. It can be an assistant. So that's where we're going. But the use cases, again, think about them in your context and then how AI is going to help on that as well. All right. The last thing that we're going to talk about is, and I know that we only have a minute left here as we kind of end, but we're going to talk about AGI, artificial general intelligence, and it basically it's AI that can perform any intellectual task as well as a human can, and this is really important because as AI right now, we call this narrow AI, meaning that we can train to do certain tasks really well. But artificial general intelligence, it can kind of learn on its own. It can do all these tasks just by providing the context. And it's maybe a few years away. And this is where a lot of folks are kind of really interested. But given that we only have a couple of minutes left, the part around AGI is that it's kind of the holy grail, right, of artificial intelligence. Once we get to AGI, then we can essentially throw any type of task, a reasoning task to AI, and it can kind of help us along that way. But in order for it to be helpful to us and in order to align with our values and ethics, one of like the technique, it's called alignment that these models are doing and these companies are using. So alignment is really the process of ensuring that the AI systems understand and follow human values, intentions, and objectives. So the goal is to have AI systems that not only perform tasks effectively, but also do so in a manner that really aligns with the human ethics, norms, and expectations. So alignment is really important. And a lot of these companies that are building large language models, talk about alignment as part of their systems. And of course, there is certain things around expectations on these models and how they're being used. So we talk a lot about models today, but we're building products. And next, during our next kind of series, we're going to show you how some of these products actually work and how we're building these products on top of these large language models and OpenAI APIs and so on and so forth. But those are underlying technologies. So when we talk about AI, they're not necessarily coming through in the application at the end of the day, but they're coming as part, and that's why we need to talk about it in the larger context. So I feel like we've run. We didn't have
Yeah.
enough content for
Well,
today, but we actually had quite a bit of content. So this has hopefully been very useful for folks as we've gone through this. And next week we're going to focus on some of the AI applications, specifically on the productivity side and the student experience, right, with AI assistants, both on the productivity and also the student experience side.
Well, we are right at 4 o'clock, and I just thank you, artists, for your thoughts and your reflections around the ethics of artificial intelligence. One thing that I'm taking away from this is number one, we can focus on all of the ethical considerations and be fraught with fear from diving deep and exploring it, and that's not what we want to do in this scenario. It's quite the opposite. We want to be realistic about the challenges that are being explored right now. recognize that AI is at the ground level for everyone. So you're not behind. We're here and having these ethical considerations. And then most specifically for this audience of enrollment stakeholders, enrollment planning leaders, the question I want to leave you all with is how can you effectively engage your higher education leadership and enrollment stakeholders on your respective campuses around discussions around regarding ethical AI integration into your campus processes? Because maybe you're not thinking about this now because you've got a lot on your plate, but it certainly is going to be an essential part of the profession to have these conversations. Artists, I want to thank you for sharing your thoughts from your seat of expertise related to some of the most pressing inquiries. I challenge all of our audience members to write down some of the questions that came up for you and bring them to the next session, AI applications, which will be our final installment this next Thursday, same time, same place. Thank you all very much for spending this time with us. We appreciate you. We will send out an evaluation afterwards for you to give your feedback. Have a great rest of your Thursday. Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good one.
Bye.